It's Dr. Scott. Very excited to give you another power punctuation lesson. These files are in the files box in Canvas under punctuation, of course. And none of this is required. It's more like advanced lessons because here you are in a more advanced writing course. Many of you, as I've mentioned in some of my other power punctuation videos, are like what I call salt and pepper cooks. You cook okay, your food's all right, but you just use salt and pepper as your spices. And of course, any real chef would have a whole rack full of different spices and herbs, and that's part of the joy of cooking. And so using some of these power punctuation tools is also part of the joy of writing. It literally gives your writing more power, more expressive quality, spices it up. And semicolons are on the list. Once you start looking for semicolons in professional writing, I think you'll begin to see them everywhere. Just two basic ways to use these things, and I'll try to be clear on the differences because you don't want to mix them up. You have to use it either one way or the other, not sort of try to make a mishmash of the two. So the first way, the most familiar way, is to use a semicolon as a comma period hybrid to link similar sentences together. The key here is that you could just put a period in instead of the semicolon. The semicolon is just an extra spice to tell the reader that these two things go together. So here's a famous quote from Adlai Stevenson, a once famous politician of the 20th century. A beauty is someone you notice, semicolon. A charmer is someone who notices you. Now, it would be fine to put a period there and a capital A here, but the semicolon gives this delicious sense of, do you see how these two ideas are interrelated? So for those of you that like to write long chains of sentences that are interrelated, the semicolon might save you. You can't just put a comma there. That's called a comma splice. There's another punctuation handout about that. Of course, you can put a period there, but then it seems somehow too disconnected for some of you. So the semicolon allows you to have that delicious flavor. And again, it's always an option. That's one reason these power punctuation rules are rarely taught, because they're not really rules, they're options. Here's a second very famous phrase from American politics, John F. Kennedy. Ask not what your country can do for you, semicolon, ask what you can do for your country. And again, of course, President Kennedy could have just put a period there, but he wants to emphasize and does emphasize this incredible interrelatedness between the two ideas. He does that by saying ask not, ask what, but he also does it by using the semicolon. Same thing here. I wrote this sentence for you. Periods are emphatic. Semicolons are subtle. And I do think that captures some of the subtlety and beauty of semicolons. But notice, this is a test you should use for yourself. Every single one of the semicolons here could be replaced with a period and it would work perfectly well. If you can't do that, then you're probably using the semicolon incorrectly. Now, there is an exception to that, and that's on the rare instance in which you use a semicolon as what I would call a super comma to separate items in a long and complex list. To do this, you need to come up with a long and complicated list. So here's one. To use semicolons correctly, you need to master basic punctuation first, distinguish between colons, semicolons, parentheses, and dashes, and understand the two very different grammatical situations in which a semicolon seems suitable. Now, I could just use commas all the way through here. The problem is that it doesn't give a way to sort of distinguish the big list, sub-list categories. And it's very easy for a reader to become confused in this long string of commas in terms of the overall hierarchy. So what the semicolons allow is to break up the big categories, which include, I didn't want to hit that, that's all right, which include master basic punctuation, that's one large category. Distinguish between colons, semicolons, parentheses, and dashes, that's another subcategory. And understanding. So there's like mastering, distinguishing, and understanding, and the semicolon just makes it much easier for the reader to sort that through. Now, if that's too complicated, here's like a shopping list. I bet you'll recognize this one. I went to the store this morning to buy eggs, bacon, and orange juice, semicolon, bread, peanut butter and jelly, and potato, steak, and salad dressing. And I was trying to sort of hint here that maybe these are the breakfast items, and then a semicolon, and maybe these are the lunch items, and these are the dinner items. I know I sound like a broken record here, but yeah, you don't have to use a semicolon. You can just use commas all the way, But I think if you look at what that would do, it just becomes kind of this long, undistinguished list, and it doesn't have the sense of being broken into three very easy to digest pieces. Oh, digest, there's a bad pun. Sometimes a list also requires a colon to avoid confusion, to mark the beginning of a list, or to avert a grammatical catastrophe. So that's just yet another example of using these semicolons. Here's one for car nuts. Like if you're a car person, a car needs many different systems to operate safely. The brakes, brake fluid, and taillights. The steering mechanism, steering fluid, and turn signals. And a driver who is alert, cautious, and courteous. So again, there's three large categories with subcategories. Could be done with commas. Could be done with salt and pepper. Could be cooked with just salt and pepper, but tastes better with semicolons. Anyway, give it a try yourself, and especially begin to look for this in professional writing in your textbooks. You'll find them. In the assigned readings for this course, you'll find them all over the place. When you're reading stuff on the web, you will find them. They are there because professional writers love power punctuation. Time for you to start experimenting.